All right. Hello, everyone. We are back. Um, or I'm back, I guess, with a new guest, first time guest of the podcast, Bohm. Would you like to introduce yourself or just say hi?
Hey, how's it going, guys? I think everybody who's listening to this probably knows me by now.
Yep. Bohm is a longtime coach, debuted in season two, and that's what we're looking at, season two, week three. So, without further ado, all right,
Jumping in.
that's it. And now we will watch it. All right, so this is game one. Um, so y'all know how it goes. We don't really cast these games. We sort of just let them play, and then if ideas pop into our head during the games, we can talk about them, but we'll have an extended conversation after. I'm shocked that that killed.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't have that thing at least
This is a little fast.
scarf
Let's slow
or
this down.
yeah, sashed. I thought for sure I'd have it sashed, but it
Yeah.
looks like I found the sheet. It looks like I had sash on hat.
Mm. Ooh, interesting. Was that a
It made me throw
U-turn
it hat.
on Coco, I wonder? I think it is, because that's probably the only bug move it gets, and I probably wanted to run physical. Yeah, because
Right.
Ironhead was the steel spike. Yeah, so interesting U-turn for the max Flutterby. I actually really like that into the psychic lead
Yeah.
because
I was worried about you one shotting indeed or yeah, Hatterene before the game started, I think, because I mean I don't know any other reason why I would have ran
oh
Sash
wait,
on
I
her
think there's a
except that.
third game that I don't have on here actually. Um, that's not good. I will pull that up in real time. Um, because that's how we do it. Actually, maybe I could just leave this playing on this tab and I'll go somewhere else. But yeah. Um, is this, do I win this somehow?
It it looks like it for a bit here.
I wonder how I
Just
break through how do I break through the Gigalith?
I, I if I remember, I mean again I browsed through it a little bit last night, but if I
Hmm.
remember right, it gets close. Scraggy came in almost in clutch here, if I remember right.
Damn.
And I always forget. I was rewatching this, and I always forget how move distribution was. Runiclus getting everything got expanding force.
Yeah, it was awesome. Uh-oh, weakness policy.
Weakness policy was. I think I ran that on Gigalith just about every week.
Yeah, and I think I even probably knew that at this point, but was like, I should uh I should try to kill it.
Right, looks like the biggest threat.
Yeah. Damn, Scraggy.
He hit hard. I'm actually super surprised at how hard he was hitting. And it took me a while to realize when I was rewatching this that you had speed swapped Gigalith. Because if you look back on the
Yeah.
side, it just says it's speed swapped with its target, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't even remember which one it did.
Oh, that actually is really annoying. The Galvantula speed swap is really nice. Nothing gets speed swap in Gen 9, actually. I was just looking at that, which is actually really annoying.
Yeah, there's a few moves that I was looking for, and I can't remember what during the season. I can't remember which ones off the top of my head, but I was surprised none of them had distribution.
Yeah. Well, because I was looking at Alolan Raichu for the season, just because I was curious what it did. I knew it was a big speed swapper in Gen 8, and I knew that a lot of the things that had speed swap in Gen 8 don't have it, so I was really hoping it would. But it's still
Right.
only Rabska that has it, and Rabska's 45 base speed,
Yeah,
so it's like
what's
the worst possible speed swapper.
I mean, it could, if it lives, you could screw somebody up, I guess, but
Yeah, but why not just like trick Iron Ball or something? Like, I feel like there are
right.
better ways to do it.
Use your use your actual utility a little better than that.
Yeah, or
I
just
don't know,
like,
but
or Trick Room, and it's like maybe it would be usable if it was like 20 speed and a trick. I mean, it is a Trick Room setter, but it's not like 20 speed. Like 45 speed isn't even that slow.
no.
Uh,
And I mean, that's I think on this team, if I look back on it, I had Rabombi for speed
mhm,
swap just for so this team I had
just
was
for giggle.
slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gigalith, Torkoal occasionally could sweet swap.
Hmm.
Arachnid, I think I don't think he came that often.
Raquanen is
Raquinid,
such a beast. It
he
must have been
was a
like
beast.
tier 3 or 2 in the season 2. It's so funny.
The tier list, I remember the tier list being interesting because that was the tier list where Gigalith was on it like it was on twice, and I
Yeah,
wasn't paying attention. I drafted at the lower one, and we had
yeah,
like a mid draft debate whether or not if I
yeah,
could keep it.
yeah.
But
That was wild, and
I
it
mean,
was
it was
so good.
growing.
Yeah. Um, but yeah. So I mean, I'll move on to the next game pretty quickly. But like my takeaway is that like the Coco was actually matched up pretty well into the psychic combo, which is clearly
Right.
what was intended, and it worked out pretty well actually. But I just didn't have the longevity with this team to really compete with Gigalith and Araquanid. Like I couldn't really do anything to them.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it Gen 8 was weird. It felt like a lot of teams were they didn't have the they either had bulk or they didn't have bulk.
Yeah.
And it if you had bulk, it was like one or two mons, and
Mhm.
that was it. And then with Gigantamax and Dynamax, it just didn't feel like things could live that long unless you were Dynamaxing your bulky Pokemon.
Yeah. And that's sort of what I did with Tapu Fini the first 2 weeks, but I dropped it before this game for Coco, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about that after the set
Okay.
bit. But let's head over to game two. Um, yeah, let's just start it up. It's just pretty fast, so I'll put it on slow. Um, yeah, so you switch up the lead, I switch up the lead. Um, Sun mode obviously strong. I wonder what I plan for this.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
you
wow.
you hit weakness policy, which was awesome,
Yeah, and
and
unburden.
then I
Oh,
just
I
realized
remember what I did. I remember what I did actually. I forgot about this. Um, this so Drifblim I think can go faster than Venusaur. I'm pretty sure with unburden, or maybe I can check. But actually, no, maybe they're both 80 speed. I'll check after this. But
I
I
think it's
feel like
close, but after a max tailwind or max whatever airstream,
yeah, no, but I feel like for whatever reason I thought that I feel like I messed up the speed tiers and I was supposed to outspeed their Oko with Airstream from the Unburden, but I think I messed up the speed tier and did a speed tie instead. But I might be wrong about that. They might
oh
both be 80 speed. I'll check.
yeah, it's been a while since I've had a Venusaur of any kind. That's the one I'm not sure. I know Drifblim is definitely 80. I've had him a
Yeah, I
couple
feel like
times.
they're both 80 now that I think back on it. In which case, what was I hoping for? Hoping that you would just max? Um,
Right,
maybe.
and then oh, I guess you'd be able to two hit KO him probably.
Well, I would get the Airstream and yeah. Um,
Yeah,
but I mean that went downhill fast. I'll check the speed tiers. I'm pretty sure they're both 80. Um, so I wonder what I was trying to do. Maybe I was hoping that, hmm, just hoping I would win the speed tie, or um, maybe I thought that you wouldn't go max speed for some reason, kind of betting that you wouldn't. I don't
right.
remember actually.
Yeah,
Um,
it's. I mean, I can look here if I
yeah,
had to have been. There's no
yeah.
way I
So
wasn't at that point. Oh, actually, he's a modest nature.
interesting. So what did I do? All right, so that's it's off of the. Let me put on the podcast. Okay, the viewers are now seeing the right thing, and I can now look at Showdown really quickly. They're both 80 speed or no? Let's see.
Let's say they are, but that's I can't figure out in my head
Yeah,
why I would
Driftblim
go.
is 80. Venusaur is, I'm pretty sure, 80. Yeah, they're both 80. Um, I don't know what I was thinking that you wouldn't sleep powder. Um, maybe just hoping you wouldn't. I have no idea.
Yeah,
Uh,
in my mind, I'm trying to think why. I mean, if I'm looking at Drifblim, I guess I'm not really considering it a huge threat initially. I mean, and I
Hmm.
might be just mixing up generations because we're in Gen 9 now, but I should have I mean it ended up being a good play, but I guess I'm
Hmm.
looking at it and I'm thinking I probably why wouldn't I have Max there? I'm not the in my mind, I'm not the same player I was then, but it just happened to end up being a good call. Maybe I was worried about the air slash going into him. Maybe I was worried about rocking the um
I think it's
whatever
pretty
item was
safe.
gonna proc on Burden, but
I think it's just the safer play. It's smart. I'm trying to think. Poison resist bug, right? I feel like it does. Po-
yes. I want to say so
Poison's
because I don't think Venusaur is weak to bug.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because poison is already not my strongest type memory wise, and then bug is like the hardest thing to remember because everything resists bug because bug is terrible. Um,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure poison. So, the best I could have done was neutral damage with Galv, but either way, like there's you don't really know what Drifloon's gonna do. You don't really know what that lead is gonna do.
right,
As a in general, like the most likely thing is I set Tailwind and like Volt switch out probably because what else do I do really? I don't even know. Um, or I max it, like I have some max strategy. And in either case, Sleep Powder is probably the best move because um, Drift Blim's going to be annoying, and it's the only thing that can, since you're modest, it's the only thing that can outspeed Venusaur. So you probably want it
right.
to be asleep, ideally.
It was, I mean, really going back and looking at how that match was played out. If we were to play that same match now without the knowledge of that match before, I
Mhm.
think it would be a completely different kind of match. Both of us, I think, are completely different players from
Mhm.
then, and the league overall. I think we played a 10 game season that year. That season,
Was
it
it
was
still
something
10?
crazy.
Season 1 was definitely 10.
Yeah,
Season 2 was 9 or 10.
yeah, and it was, I mean, it was long. I That was my best season, but we also since then it's been, I mean, we've gotten better players in the league. Everybody's
Yeah.
consistently got better and it's been crazy. Like team building has been the most creative. Like I'm looking at this list of stuff I put together, and nothing's creative about it.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at teams we put together now and it's like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think from season 1 especially, we're not too or I'm not too far into season 2 yet. But season 1 there were definitely some weird builds. Um I think honest like I don't even know that this is right necessarily, but just from what I've seen, it feels like the amount of like uh, smart tech options hasn't changed a ton. Maybe it's increased a little for specific coaches. Um,
Right.
like my smart tech honestly may have declined since like season 1 2, but the amount of just like random weird stuff that doesn't actually accomplish anything is so much lower. Like that was so
Yeah.
much of season 1 was just like, why is this here? What does this serve?
Well, and it was such a weird place because that's when this league season two was when really draft league started taking off across the board, and it was
Hmm.
what we were in the middle of COVID during that point, I
Yeah,
believe,
yeah, we were.
and so like you're trying to find something to do. The league I was in, I first league I started in was oh I can't remember what league it was, but it was a draft, but it wasn't a snake draft,
Hmm. Oh,
and I was
yeah.
the last pick in the draft.
Yeah, I think
So
I remember you sending that at the time.
yeah, and it was, and I found your post on Reddit, and
Hmm.
I got into this, and it was like night and day. I think I may have won one game in that league, and I went on and won several in this, and I haven't really had much luck since. But at the same time, it's crazy, like the difference, and people were trying to get a feel for it at the time,
Yeah,
and from going from a non-snake draft, which I guarantee nobody's done since then,
yeah,
to go into
that's
this
not
league and
good.
seeing how it's grown is it's amazing at that point.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the draft, so my recollection of that we were just talking about is I feel like you sent it because I think people were rightfully sort of like freaking out at how good your draft was. Um, and then I think you sent in Discord like this was my last draft, and everybody was realized it was not a snake draft and was like kind of baffled.
Right.
Yeah,
It was definitely different.
so your team was Indeedee, Torkoal, um sorry,
Venusaur,
Venusaur, Hatterene, uh going down the list, Gigalith, Rabombi, Araquanid, and Lycanroc Midday. Which, first of all, Lycanroc Midday as your worst Pokemon is pretty damn good.
right.
Um,
I
Araquanid
did,
and Rabombi probably as your next worst is ridiculous because like Araquanid is really good. Rabombi is pretty good. Um,
I do remember something now looking at this. If you look at pick 11, I didn't pick. I
yeah.
I remember using up all my points because I was
Oh
still new
yeah.
to the draft stuff, and I tried to get away with taking 10,
Yeah.
and then I had to make some trade. I ended up with Krabby.
Yeah. I remember that actually.
I think I dropped Lycanroc
I
and took
also
Krabby.
I also just forgot to look at round 9, 10, 11. So Lycanroc wouldn't have been your worst Pokemon anyway. Um, but like
Okay.
Noctowl is fine. I was never a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it falls off actually. But the first seven are incredible. You have the Psychic duo, you have the Sun duo, you have um, Gigalith, Rabombi, and Araquanid. So that's seven really, really, really good Pokemon.
Yeah. And it was
Um,
I
mhm.
think the next season we ended up going to I I if I recall right, this season wasn't a point-based season. Like we didn't do like a
This was
1 through
tiers.
20.
Yeah, this was tiers.
Yeah.
I think season three, I think, was also tiers, and then season four was points.
Okay, season 4 was points cuz I remember season 4, the one whichever season we first went to points, it was literally impossible to put this team back together for me.
Yeah, I think it was season four because I think, well, season four I know was my Metagross team, and I think that was the first points draft.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this was a ridiculous team. It was a really good draft. And I think around the draft episode of season two a few weeks ago, who did I definitely had James on for that. I think I had James and Daddy. But James, I
Right.
believe, was saying something about how um we did a lot more like 1-2 combos in season one, season two, that uh sort of time. But that's sort of fallen off a little. Not completely. There are definitely still like dynamic duos, but
Right.
I mean, I don't think your team is bad because of the dynamic duos. I think it's really good. And basically, what I like so much about it is that you have really like two stellar duos of the psychic duo, the sun duo, and then I'd probably also consider like Rabombi Gigalith a duo in and of itself. But then also all of those sort of mix well. Like Torkoal likes being on the psychic duo team. Gigalith
Right.
obviously likes being with the psychic duo. Like they're it's a combo based team, but the combos fit together really intelligently. So if you remember, uh, like the can you speak to like the intentionality of like drafting these dynamic duos, but also creating a overall team synergy, or do you not really remember that?
So the one thing I do remember as we're talking a little
Hmm.
bit is I don't remember the plan before. My initial draft plan was I know Indeedee and Hat were not my first pick. I
Hmm.
honestly, I playing on like ladder or on showdown, despise trick room teams and DD
Hmm.
Hat at that point, and it just ended up being like, okay, I lost out on. I'm trying to look through the list here. I think I was probably going to try to put together Metagross and
Hmm.
Suicune. I was high on that at that time for some
Hmm.
reason, and I liked them together. So I get to my pick, which was 14, and I'm like, well, at this point, I got to take the best mon on the board, which I felt was Indeedee. And then it kind
Mhm.
of snowballed. I think I'd pick a few picks later, and next best pick for me was Torkoal, and I'm like, okay, maybe we got something here.
Mhm.
So you try to pair up the Sun because Venusaur. I don't think I picked the Max Venusaur. I think I just had regular.
Yeah,
Um,
it looks like you had regular.
I nabbed Venusaur, and I'm honestly, if I'm looking back at this, I would have switched the hat and Venusaur pick around right away. But again, I was probably just like, oh, I hate that thing, and I don't want anything to do with it. Um, but yeah, it was one of the it's one of those drafts that just ended up to me it just ended up fitting together. It wasn't like I know I deviated way from what I originally was trying to plan.
Mhm.
Um, but and this happens just about every draft. I sit down and I look at stuff and I'm like I hyper fixate on one Pokemon and I really want that Pokemon and when it's gone I'm just like, oh shit, now what am I gonna do?
Yeah, I've
But
definitely gone like both to the ends of to both ends of the extreme where it's like heavily planned, and then also just like, well, I have the seventh pick. Here are my seven favorite Pokemon. I'll pick whichever one's left.
right, exactly. And that's the thing about this upcoming one. So I've been doing a lot of prep with Rich and I'm trying to help him figure out what he wants to do for a team because I mean, he had some success. And like I said, in our like olds review last season, I was
Hmm.
trying to make a simple team for him, and
Hmm.
I'm at a complete loss what I want to build for him. I got a good idea of what I want to do for my
Hmm.
plan, but we're just having a big block right now, and that's how a lot of drafts going into them happen until you're actually sitting down, know your pick, and you're seeing some things disappear from the board.
Yeah.
I just there's no great way to actually plan a draft unless you get lucky, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think knowing your pick, once you know your pick, I think it's pretty doable. Um, so like I've had both really well, not really high picks, but I've had high picks, like quite high. And then I've also had really low picks, like 15, 16, plenty of times.
Right,
Um, so there are sort of two different things I fall into. So when I have an early pick, um, like I said, so I remember with the Metagross, I think I had the fourth pick. So list my four favorite Pokemon: Celesteela, Metagross, something something. The top one on the list that was there was Metagross. So then immediately it's okay. How do I build around Metagross? Spectre, it went. Salamence, yes. And then what do I want after that? Something that resists ice, Rotom Heat, like. So that one was heavily planned in advance, and
right,
um, when I was like writing it out, I was like, okay, I don't think I'm gonna get all this stuff, but let me just have it on paper because this is what I'm going for. And then if I get thrown a curveball and I can like alter it but keep the same idea, I'll do that. And if I need to just go a completely different direction, I can do that too.
right.
Um,
And that's what I think as a league we've done very well at. You
mhm,
miss your pick, and you're pivoting to something that's similar, but not exactly what you were going to get
mhm,
originally. And you everybody in this league can make it work.
mhm.
That's
Yeah, and
usually what's great about it.
I'm excited for the new bonds because it's not there are not a ton of them, and unfortunately they are really concentrated into the high tiers. But it gives a little
Right,
more of like last what my classic example is like last season I really wanted a mid-tier fake out, um and I was just really annoyed because like the only thing that made sense was Metacham, and Metacham only like kind of made sense, so
right.
I felt like I had to take it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, again, it's nothing comes out perfect, but then you get something like that, and then you really look into its move pool, and you're just like, okay, we've got some things that maybe it wasn't what I was looking for, but some things I can kind of incorporate and make this work a
Hmm.
little bit better.
Yeah, I mean that does happen sometimes for sure. Like I mean we saw in the set Galvantula doing stuff. I really just drafted it as a speed swap bot, which it definitely did, but it has a lot of nice other tools like struggle bug and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and I mean, I loved Gavancia. I don't think I ever got a chance to actually use it in draft. It just I had it on a couple different like boards that I was planning
mhm,
on doing, but it never actually. I either picked something else or it ended up gone by the time I wanted it. But it's one of those mons that I like the design, I like the
mhm.
typing, and it usually gets an interesting move pool,
Yeah. Well,
usable move pool.
yeah, and I mean it's like it's like the classic like bug type is usually terrible, but when you pair it with a lot of the strong defensive typings are weak to ground. So when you pair them with bug, they actually become pretty decent typings. Like obviously steel bug is a big one. Um,
Right.
rock bug. So rock isn't a defensive typing, but I realized with Cleavor, rock bug miraculously is a pretty okay typing. Like it's not
Yeah.
great, but for a mon that's biggest uh, advantage is just smacking you with rock moves, you could do a lot worse typing, like defensive typing wise, which I was shocked by.
Yeah,
Um,
and it covers it. I mean, Cleavor covers its normal
mhm,
weaknesses pretty
exactly.
well. I mean,
Yeah.
it covers the fire weakness from bug. It
Hmm.
covers. I mean, I think
The
rock
ground.
is resistant to rock, right? I mean, you
I
get a
th-
couple.
I actually think that's. You're putting me on the spot with one of the typings I don't
I
know.
know. I do this.
Let me
I
check.
and I'm usually wrong, but I want to
I
say no.
feel
It's
like
not.
rock doesn't resist rock.
Yeah,
That's
I
my
lied.
instinct. Yeah. But it only has like three weaknesses or something, like rock, steel, water, I want to say. Water,
Yep.
rock,
Yeah.
steel. Yeah. Like for a bug type and for a rock type, like even separately, for a bug type, three weaknesses would be pretty good. Uh rock type, three weaknesses pretty good. A bug rock type, I was shocked that it's only three. Like totally
Yeah.
shocked.
And I mean,
Obviously,
its move pool
mhm,
is deep.
yeah. Obviously,
It's
it literally has two resists in normal and poison, which is really bad. Like really, really, really bad. I cannot stress how bad that is. That is so
right.
bad. But you know, we're talking about a mon that just smacks like 135 base attack, and then it has sharpness, which by the way, any of those abilities, so sharpness might be I don't know if it's the best of them, but those abilities that boost a type of move. So sharpness, the mega launcher, the Clawitzer ability, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
those abilities are all so sick because they just make
Right.
them on so strong. Um,
Yeah, and it shows they're actually trying to think about how to make something viable versus
mhm,
just constantly throwing out new legendaries and others and starters with special moves and everything.
mhm.
It's just nice to see something get an ability that's not. I mean, sharpness has changed a lot of mons.
I love
I
sharpness.
mean,
Makes
yeah,
Glade so
it
cool.
yeah, it's a great ability and it actually made Gallade somewhat usable.
Well, Glade was usable last gen just for very different reasons. It
Yeah,
was actually a
exactly.
really good support mon, but it was like
Right.
a I don't know, it must have been around 10-ish points. It is not around 10-ish points now. It is
No,
maybe it was around 12 last gen, but it's like 16 now or something like. It can still do those supporting things, but if it wants to, it can also just smack you.
yeah,
Really, really, really hard. Um, yeah, but that was a tangent. Basically, my point is Galvantula has a rare typing where the bug type isn't actually that terrible. Like no, you don't love that it's still rock weak, fire weak. Those are both really not great, but it is an electric type that is not weak to ground, which is
right.
nice. Um, yeah, but sort of transitioning out of nowhere, not really transitioning, just like
Moving
completely
on.
flipping this conversation on its head. I made a really, really big move before this week, which I've kind of been teasing in the prior two episodes this season, where so basically, and I mean, we're this actually kind of is on topic because we're just talking about how you would sort of want this specific mon, and then it wouldn't get to you, and you'd have to switch it up. So that's what happened to me.
Right.
I wanted Tapu Koko. Tapu Koko went fourth in the draft, fourth. New mon, really fast, terrain. I was really excited about it because I had Tyranitar season one. That was like my ace in a sense. I mean, I guess my ace was really Reuniclus, but like my supposed best Pokemon was T-Tar. Um,
Yeah.
and I liked that I had the weather control just because it's a very again early draft days. Like it's a very straightforward way to play, or at least a straightforward way to build and draft, which
Right.
is comfortable, right? Um, so I liked that about T-Tar. I liked that it was easy to build a team around it. So I was looking at weather and terrain, and all the Tapus had just come back. But I really didn't like how T-Tar always felt like uh, I was letting my opponent dictate what they wanted to do because T-Tar is slow. So
Yeah.
Tapu Koko 130 speed, that's my mon. Uh, it doesn't even get close to where I was drafting. So I switched it up. Um, I've already talked about my draft, so I don't need to talk about it again. But I eventually go and get Tapu Fini, which kind of, you know, very, very different Pokemon from Tapu Koko, but it is a terrain setter. So it does
Yeah.
kind of match on that, match in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so when AC drops Tapu Koko, the first thing I do is I try to pick it up. I checked with a few people, definitely Braff, definitely Steve. I want to say probably Daddy. I don't know though. And probably Jordan, although I don't know. Maybe a few other people. Like I asked a bunch of people. Steve was the
Yeah.
only person who was like, "Hell no, do not drop Tapu Fini for Tapu Koko. Tapu Fini is better." Um, everyone else, I believe, was at least somewhat supportive. There were definitely, and I don't want to guess who these people were, but there were definitely people who were as thrilled as I was because I was so sure that Tapu Koko was better. Um,
Right.
I also, so there were two warning signs. Number one warning sign, Steve told me not to do it. Steve knows what he's talking about. Number two warning
Yeah.
sign. Number two warning sign. AC drafted it fourth overall and dropped it after 2 weeks. AC
Right.
also knows what he's talking about. Two massive warning signs. I ignored them and I got Tapu Koko. Very bad. Very, very bad. We saw it. I think we actually got a really good first appearance from Tapu Koko of like kind of what's wrong with it. So the turn one of the first game, it did a really good job. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. Max bug move into Indeedee, knocks it out, drops Hatterene's special attack by one stage. Beautiful turn. And then I get all of my max turns out of it. I get two steel spikes. Um, exactly what you want. You want three attacking turns for your, you know, not really glass cannon. I would say more just like cannon.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. It's not
max
too
target.
frail, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So it seems like I got everything I wanted, but I end up losing. Just because I can't break through. And I think that's really indicative of the problem with Tapu Koko in Gen 8 Max Draft. It just doesn't have the firepower that it should. So its physical attack stat is actually quite high. Let me check what it is before I
Yeah.
just say it.
I'll be good.
It's something pretty high, like 130,
115.
120. 115. It's actually lower than I
Yeah.
thought. I thought it was like 120. Um, 115 is actually not that high. So, I mean, electric moves in electric terrain off a 115 attack, that's pretty strong. That's really it. On top of that, it doesn't get any physical fairy moves. So if you want to
Right.
use a fairy move, you're using a 95 special attack, which is not particularly good. Definitely not for max target. It's not super frail, but it's pretty frail. You're not running weakness policy. Not that I had anything that could set it super well. The electric typing blocks the steel weakness from fairy, the natural weakness. So you actually can't bullet punch it. It's
Right.
weak to ground. You don't want to bulldoze because you're 130 speed. It's weak to poison. There's not really a good poison move to proc weakness policies, and I didn't have any Pokemon that learned those moves. Trying to think what it. Yeah, I mean, is that all it's weak to? Ground and poison? I think so.
Yeah, that's what it looks like right here.
Yeah, so you can't set the weakness policy. It has a 95 base special attack if you want to use both stabs. It has a 115 attack, which basically gives you one stab, um, or you're using coverage moves. So in reality, it's not actually that strong at all.
Right.
I can double check this actually right now. but I want to say it also didn't. Actually, I feel like that's wrong. I think it did get Electro Web. Let me
Yeah,
check.
oh,
I think it did.
yeah, it did. It did. It did.
Yeah.
TM82.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so I don't think Tapu Koko is bad. Here's what I think happened. After the season, I think I would have said Tapu Koko is bad, but here is my more you know, a year plus why almost 2 years wiser take. Um,
Right.
Tapu Koko in a max format should not be your max option. The max option should be a switch up. I feel like this week I ran like Wild Charge, Thunder Punch, U Turn, Iron Head, Assault Vest. I feel like I went Assault. No, I don't know. I don't know. I definitely did run an Assault Vest variant sometimes. Obviously, you're not really gonna run a choice variant if you're maxing. I think I did
Right.
occasionally, but you don't want to be doing that. Um, yeah, so I think a physical max set could be your mix up, but you really want it to just spam electro webs. Um, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he seems more looking at his move set and his stats, he seems more like a nice speedy support. He can deal a little bit of damage, but you want something next to him that's really
Hmm.
laying in some damage against the
Yeah.
other team.
And it really wasn't enough offensive pressure to have that as my main max option. So my main max option would remain Terrakion, which is fine. Terrakion's a good max target, but
Right.
um, with its many weaknesses as a rock type, as a fighting type, um, you don't want to max it every week, and that left me with really few max options. It left me with Delmise in Trick Room, Reuniclus in Trick Room. That's really about it. Drifblim mix-ups as well. So
Right.
picking up Tapu Koko instead of Tapu Fini put me in a really, really difficult position as far as finding something to max. That's the first issue. The second issue is that, like I said, Trakin probably my best max option uh, with Tapu Koko, uh, which is fine. Like the 130 speed Electro Webs are nice for Trakion, but neither are particularly bulky, and they're both weak to Earthquake, so you're kind of asking to just get Earthquake spammed. Um,
Right.
130 speed Electro Web is nice, but it's not, at least at the point that the format was at. I don't think it was super important for Terrakion, because basically either things were way faster than Terrakion, like Prankster Tailwind, and then Attack, so that they would also be faster than Tapu Koko, or they were slower than Terrakion. So, like, the synergy is actually kind of minimal, because you're really only cutting off, um, like 60 speed Tailwind abusers. Um,
Yeah.
I can't do speed tiers in my head, but something like that, 60 speed ish Tailwind abusers, maybe 70 speed, and Pokemon in the 130 to 108 speed range, which is not a lot of Pokemon. It's really not. So they actually don't pair that well, my two best Pokemon, and one of them doesn't max super well. So, and we had the S tier this season, so basically we had one single Pokemon. We could not use free points to get another one. Um, we were only allotted one, and that was Tapu Koko for me. It couldn't max, and it couldn't really work well with my next best maxed option.
Yeah.
So it really was a clunky fit. Really, really
Right.
clunky.
And if you're looking back, I mean, if we go back in time and you're looking
Hmm.
at this tier list, I mean, and you're on this making decisions,
Hmm.
you would probably pull Tapu Koko right out of the S tier,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I
knowing
think we
what you
did
know
next
now.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because before the season, I think there was some sentiment, even no, yeah, I think there was some sentiment that Tapu Fini was like the most underwhelming of the S tiers because everything in the S tier was like either it could max or it was Whimsicott. And Tapu Fini
Yeah.
was seen as this Pokemon that like couldn't really max. It was bulky, but what did it really do? Um, when you have mons like Rillaboom, Metagross, um, Celesteela, like all of those mons are really, really uh, there's aggressive pressure from those mons. So
Yeah.
I think, except for James, who definitely played in Gen 7, um, not many of us had played with Tapu Fini before. So I think we just kind of assumed it wouldn't be a good max option. In my first 2 weeks, I won both sets. Tapu Fini was really good. It was a maxer in one set and not a maxer in the other set. But basically, either you can max and just do decent damage and not die, or you can like calm mind and max, or you can not max and still eat max moves because Tapu Fini is that bulky. So
Yeah.
actually, it was a
And
really good Pokemon.
you
It was a
look at
really
him
really good
too.
Pokemon.
I mean,
Hmm.
like you said, the bulk's great. The special attack, which is, I mean, you don't have to choose what you're going to be
Hmm.
using because he's going to go special attack. It's the same
Hmm.
as Coco, but you're
Exactly.
actually living more hits. You're
Exactly.
actually able to stay on the field, especially with Dynamax.
Yeah, and you can use the fairy. Like the fairy is
Right.
so important. Like if Tapu Koko had a play rough, it wouldn't have made it that much better, frankly, but it would have been better. It would have been better. The reason I say it wouldn't have been that much better is because anti synergy with the max moves. Because you want your electric
Yeah,
terrains to stay up
you just
to
tear
power
your
up
terrain
your.
down.
Yeah, exactly. So,
And I mean, I'm
mhm.
looking at Feeney right now, and it's got play rough. Why? Why?
They gave
Why?
play rough to Lele and Fini,
Everything.
but not Bulu or Coco.
It makes no sense to me. They wouldn't be overpowered. It
Uh,
would make them
I
viable.
think
I mean, it
I
wouldn't
think
make
Coco
Coco
I
overpowered.
think Coco would have been in Gen 8. Sorry, Gen 7. I think
Yeah,
Coco was really good in Gen 7, I believe. I didn't play it, but I believe it was really good. Um, and play rough would make it really, really good. Uh,
right.
I agree. It wouldn't have helped it that much in Max in Gen 8. Um, but like they didn't give the terrain moves to any of those mons either. Like Bulu didn't have Grassy Glide. Coco didn't
Right.
have Rising Voltage. That's another that actually may have made Coco good, Rising Voltage, because
Yeah.
um, it is only 70 base power, but as we know, 140 base power in terrain. That's the whole point. But
Right.
also, its max move base power was 140, I believe, um, regardless of terrain being up, or you know,
Yeah.
regardless of terrain. Otherwise, Thunderstorm was a 130 base, uh, I believe, on most moves. Um, Maybe not for
Yeah.
Thunder, but I think for like Thunderbolt, I think it was 130. So Rising Voltage actually would have been really nice. Um, Also, because then it doesn't force you to max because you would have the 140 base power Rising Voltage as a non-max, um, which would allow you to basically like you could basically deter your opponent from maxing any water or flying type without maxing yourself, which would be really good. But it didn't have
Right.
that, so it was bad. It was a really clunky fit on the team. The team, by some miracle, was actually really well constructed around Tapu Fini, even though I didn't really understand how strong Tapu Fini was, and it just fell
Yeah.
apart after getting Coco. Like nothing was as good as it was in the first 2 weeks ever again after the move. That was a lot of talking about that specific move. Um, but the sort of broader thing I wanted to just ask you was, um, what is your transaction history been like? So we've had a lot of different points of view on here. I'll give you a couple and you can tell me like if one of them really
Yeah.
speaks to you or not. So a lot of people feel like well I think this is like most people feel like it's really hard to, especially with the 7 week seasons, I think, um, figure out the transactions that are best for your team early enough in the season for it to matter. So
Right.
definitely some people have talked about making the wrong transaction too early. I think the Tapu Koko move is a really good example of that. And then there's also waiting too long to make a transaction or not making a transaction at all and then sort of regretting that. So that's where I've skewed most seasons is the like waiting too long to make a transaction, and then by end of season playoffs, you don't have a good enough feel for your new Pokemon,
Yeah.
or you get up to the deadline and you don't even make a move, and then you're like, wow, I really should have made this move. Um,
I would say it's become for me. I mean, this season in particular,
mhm,
season two, I don't believe I made a transaction, and I
mhm,
don't believe season three I did either.
mhm,
And I probably lean more towards now, waiting towards like the mid-season point
mhm,
because I want to try to let some things work. So if I hit week
mhm,
3 or 4 and I know, hey, this mon ain't working, this mon's on the board, I'm trying to make those changes then. So if that mon doesn't work out,
mhm.
I can maybe make a different transaction later.
Yeah.
I mean, in this past season, I toyed with the idea versus Electric, where I got to the week against Electric, and I'm like looking at Murkrow, and I'm like, I don't want Murkrow. And I see Gastrodon on the board, and I pick up Gastrodon, and he was a major player in that game versus
Mhm.
Electric. And Electric messages me, he's like, I don't know why you dropped Murkrow. He was the one telling me to pick up a Dark type before the season started. So it was one of those things that benefited me. What I do afterwards, I just swapped it right back out because I didn't see Gastrodon as a permanent member of the team for the rest of the
Yeah.
season. But it's one of those things where it's just you want to get a good feel. I don't think I
Mhm.
can make a transaction week 6 unless I absolutely had to make playoffs or something like
Mhm.
that. I
Yeah.
would
I mean,
rather try to
oh, go ahead.
take some
Sorry.
time to develop the team.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, sort of what you said with like the transaction that was really good for a specific matchup. Um, like talking with Steve about some of his prep, one of the things that I forget which season it was, but there was one season where I know Salazzle was one of the transactions, but he had to make playoffs, and basically he had all of his transactions left, and he set it up weeks in advance of like the Pokemon that he wanted for this week, this week, this week to maximize his chance to make the playoffs because he needed
Right.
to win every game. I haven't really ever thought of transactions like an asset like that. Like he really used it as an asset. Like this is an advantage that I have that I can use to make the playoffs. I've always thought of like how do I make my team the best in a vacuum?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know which is better because it's like in theory like teams are good enough and players are good enough that you want to just have the best team, but if there's something out there that can really pose significant problems and you really need to win a specific match, I think if you're not going to otherwise use the transactions, and I feel like I haven't been sure enough about transactions recently, so I've just not used them in recent seasons, even though I probably should have. Um,
Yeah.
if you're not going to use them anyway, you might as well use them like matchup based, because
Right.
yeah,
I think the last 2 seasons were very difficult to do that because we're playing with a more limited pool than we've been used
exactly,
to the
yeah,
past like year. So
yeah,
there's not as much value sitting there. Whereas we're coming into a
hmm
season now where I feel like we're going to start seeing more transactions take place week
yeah,
to week because there's going to be different value for different people.
yeah. And I mean, like, I from personal experience, like, so reflecting after last season, when I had an idea for a transaction early and then didn't make it, and then basically by the time I knew I wanted to make it, I was already out of playoffs. So I was pissed about that. And then like week 2 this season, I was ready to like fire off transactions, because I got to like very quick um, stances on my team of like what works,
Right.
what doesn't, what can I swap out. Um,
Right.
so I did that very quickly, and then I was looking at the board, and it was just nothing is worth it. There's nothing left.
Oh,
So that'll be interesting. That's a really good point because I was thinking about that as well.
yeah, definitely. And I mean that's the same thing. 'Cause I didn't make too many transactions early, but
Hmm
Rich this past season was looking, and we are trying to figure out what's going to work better for him because he
hmm
didn't like. I think we had like Titan and Obama Snow.
hmm
He was very high on. I think he ended up picking up Haxorus
Yeah.
and Espathra. So those are picks that I wasn't big on either of them, but he
hmm
ended up because he wanted to do them early. But I mean, they paid off for him. So it just
Yeah.
depends on the player, I think, too.
Yeah.
Trust in your gut a little bit, even if somebody who's telling you not to, who's
hmm
been playing a while,
And I mean,
tells you to.
I think like that's a good example of like there wasn't nothing. Like there was also Dundozo on the board. Um,
Yeah,
there wasn't nothing. It was just like there's so little that it's very possible that there's nothing that fits your team.
Right.
Especially because, and I mean, this is w- we're already actually quite long on this, so I guess this will be a last sort of thought, a last question for you. Um, when you're looking to make a transaction, do you sort of try to fill like so? Let's say in season two you had Venusaur and you were like, wow, I really hate this Pokemon. It's not working for me. Would you try to refill its role, get a new chlorophyll Pokemon, or do you just go in an entirely separate direction where it's like that role wasn't I misevaluated that I needed that type of Pokemon, so I'm just gonna go in a completely different direction. Like, how do
Right. I
you
guess
go about that?
it would depend on what's on the board, of course. Because
Hmm.
if I'm looking at the same thing, if I want to do chlorophyll user, I'm looking at
Hmm.
Lilligant at that point.
Yeah,
Lilligant fills a totally different role,
yeah.
which it could be what you need because you can after your eruptions are just
Hmm.
amazing at that point. So I would
Yeah,
get different offense, whereas Venusaur was the main form of offense. It switched to Torkoal.
yeah.
So it would depend on what I would need. Or again, if I'm looking at something, say I didn't like maybe Sun wasn't working out for me, and I wanted
Hmm.
to drop both Venusaur and Torkoal,
Hmm.
and I'd be trying to find something that filled that role of being able to kind of enable some speed, but also something else that kind of hits hard with it.
Yeah,
So a tailwind user and something else that could kind of benefit from that and still hit pretty hard and maybe
yeah,
do a little bit of tech like the sleep powder or something like that
yeah,
to disrupt. I
yeah.
just
I
want
mean,
to
I
keep it
go
similar
ahead.
but not
Hmm.
crazy different.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is I guess the answer is whatever you have is not working for some reason, but you also probably wanted it for some reason. So there
Right.
are certain things you want to. I think the Lilligant is a great example of like there are certain things you want to keep. You want to keep the chlorophyll boost, but there are certain things that you want to change. Like After You is a very different kind of game than uh, the max sleep powder mind games.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's a good. I think that's a very good apt response. Um, but that'll just about do it for us this week. I think I rambled a little more than I usually do. Rambled a lot about Coco just because I have a lot of
I mean,
thoughts pent up about that.
it was a major transaction. I mean, it's one of those things you just kind of learn from after it. And
Hmm.
I mean, it was early in our draft league seasons, and it was early in our
Hmm.
drafting history. So that's you learn from those, and we kind of, I mean, you see how the league is now. We've built upon that big time.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. So I mean that'll do it for us. Do you have any last thoughts or parting words for?
Um, um, ready to start the next draft. You already know that. I've been talking about it for weeks, so
Let's
excited to see
go.
the end of the grand champs and get on to season 10.
Let's go. All right. See you guys.